From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined, as always, with our super producer, Dylan, the Tennessee pal Fagin. Most importantly, you are you. You are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. We have something special for you this evening, folks. A sprawling tale of true crime, corruption, and conspiracy originating with, oddly enough, one of the key figures meant to help enact the law. This story is so wild that we had to go straight to the source to learn more, and so we are over the moon to be joined with tonight's special guest, the award-winning journalist, host, writer, podcaster. You've heard him or seen him in everything. The man at the helm of the new podcast, criminal attorney, Brandon Jinx Jenkins. Jinx, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
What's up, y'all? What an intro. I love that. Thank you all for having me.
Ben's great at this.
Oh, man, we're so excited to talk to you, Jinx. We've been listening to Criminal Attorney. Look, this is just spoiler on my part. I haven't heard the final episode yet, so I'm all the way up to 5.
Okay.
And I got questions about the end. I don't know how much we're going to spoil about the show because everybody can go listen to Criminal Attorney right now.
We'll need to issue a spoiler alert if you do choose to do so. Okay.
Yeah,
true.
We'll count down from
etiquette.
3.
Yeah.
Okay. But before we get into anything, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself and then tell us how you got into this story.
Man, okay. It's funny. I'm back here in Atlanta for my school's homecoming. So a lot of friends are like now talking to me about it. And admittedly, I was not aware of how wide and like just how big of an audience true crime is. Like, you know, you might be into like rap music, you might be into pop music, you might be into basketball, soccer, whatever, but it seems like everyone is into true crime, which probably says a lot about us as people. But anyways,
yeah.
So it's been interesting because people are like, how'd you get here? So I guess you can say like my career of doing this started like, I don't know, man, maybe like a decade ago. And I was just like a blogger at a magazine called Mass Appeal. So they used to do like hip hop, rap, graffiti, skate, all that stuff.
Know it well, yeah.
Yeah, it's like one of my favorite magazines back when it was in print. And then I was working there as like a young like intern. And then from there, I transferred from there to like Complex. A lot of people that were working at Complex were ex-Mass Appealers. So they brought me in and they were like, hey, you know, obviously you can write here, but we're doing this new thing on camera. And I was like, all right. I feel like Complex has some pretty good writers. I don't know how good I am, but if I go on camera, like a B+ is an A+ because no one else is doing it. So I was like, you know, I jumped on.
So we got into podcasting, man. I mean, back in the early days.
Been there. Yeah.
Lower the bar.
Yeah. And I was like, all right, let me just kind of creep in here. And so from there, you know, one thing led to another and I started doing like more on camera stuff. And then eventually I got into podcasting. There was a huge podcaster in the hip hop world, Combat Jack. And he had like his whole interview series with him and all his cast of characters. And then he transferred into doing something that was more narrative based, and it was Mogul. So he covered the life and death of music executive Chris Lighty. And I mean, it went off. I think that obviously narrative podcasts had been around, but I think hip hop didn't really have one. And if it did, not from a figure as celebrated as Combat. But unfortunately, Combat had passed away. And he and I were really good friends. And the people that were involved in that were like, hey, we need someone we're thinking about continuing the series. Let's bring this guy in. And this guy was me. And it was a huge honor. We did a season. Well, we did like 2 episodes on Combat, which were really great. I learned so much about his life. And then we did a season on Uncle Luke and the 2 Live Crew, which was, you know, parts of it probably could be a true crime show. But, you know, it was really cool. And then from there, we did DJ Screw in Texas. So we told these narrative stories about their lives. And then we kind of found this thing right at the end where we combined some of the idea of Mogul, which is music, and then brought it into the true crime space on a show that was titled Conviction. And so we told the story of Max B, this New York City, New Jersey-based rapper who got caught in a sort of murder plot. You know, it was really supposed to be a robbery. And then the robbery got botched. The person they were trying to rob got murdered. And Max was sort of the person who orchestrated this. But in that, he was looking for a lawyer, right? It's like, hey, I'm going to go down for murder. I need to find a lawyer. One of the lawyers that he crossed paths with was Paul Bergrin. And so he meets Paul and he's like, all right, here this guy wins all his cases, you know, like we're going to get tried in like a New Jersey courtroom. We should get this guy. From what I gather, again, I think my old producer who brought me to this project told me about it. But basically, Paul offered his services, which was like, hey, maybe we should murder the witness. And
just spitballing here, you guys. You know what I mean?
It's a quick fix, you know, that's for sure.
Look, we can plead out, you know, we can take it to trial, or hear me out. And come close. It's like
that's a jump down the street right there.
And it's like
I know what you're thinking. Let me finish.
I wonder how it is. Like I wonder if it's in sort of a Law and Order like esque room, like all just like dark oak, you know, and it's like, or if it's written on a piece of paper and he flips it over and just says murder, you know, who knows?
Yeah.
And then you hear dun dun. Cuts to the next scene.
Yeah.
Or as we learn in the show, he'll take you to a rooftop to have that conversation, or maybe into the stall of a bathroom, right?
Yeah.
Or a restaurant that he owns, you know. And Max declined. He ended up getting another lawyer named Jerry Saluti, who seemed clearly inept. And Max is now, he's doing time right now. I want to say he's in Bergen County Jail in New Jersey. So that didn't work out, but he also didn't get caught in a murder for hire plot. So anyways, that's how we found the story. And so what I thought was interesting about it was that I kind of came from the music and hip hop. It had a moment where those things intersected and we ended up with true crime and hip hop. And then this sort of just true crime. So our producer, Matthew Nelson, found this story in the nature of producing our last one. And he was like, hey, this guy, Paul, is insane. This would be a really great episode, a really great series. We're like, yeah, sure. Let's take care of the one at hand. And then I get a call and he's like, hey, so remember Paul? I was like, no. And then he told me, I was like, oh yeah, him. Do you think we should do this? You know, like, is he out? He's like, no, he's in jail. I was like, all right, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. Then we're good.
This gets us to the heart of the story, the first season of Criminal Attorney. Jinx, is it fair to say that you didn't know all the plot twists that would happen? Because as I'm listening along, as all of us are listening along, the story just gets crazier and crazier, like Shyamalan after Shyamalan plot twist.
To say I didn't know where the story was going is like an understatement, because you hear where you're going to end. And sometimes, you know, I think when I click like a true crime show on any streaming app, you know, I just kind of click it. It's like very clear log line. You're like, all right, this seems interesting. But with this one, I was like, I know the ending. So I'm like, what could happen in between that will be more surprising? But how bold he is and the sheer audacity of the decisions he's willing to make is like kind of amazing, but also really haunting. This is a human being. Like, you know, he could be in the grocery store. And also just the bravado and how he's willing to say these things confidently. Again, like from what we gathered, he offered these services to the rapper Max B. Like, you have to, it's not enough to do it. You have to say it. It's just like, what?
You know, and I mean, it's like, this is a hashtag not all attorneys kind of situation, but it really does show you too the lengths to which some people obsessed with the idea of winning will go. You know, this is like a glimpse into an entire world, like through one person who's maybe an extreme case, but it really does kind of make my mind sort of latch onto this idea that there's more cases like this, you know,
I'm sure, you know, it's like when you boil down like any career, right? Like whatever your thing is, or not even career, any aspiration, whatever your goal is, what you'll justify to get there is pretty wild, right? And I think like that's kind of what I felt about Paul, like on a, I guess maybe a more serious note. It's like, man, you're like, these are like real people you're playing. You know, these are like real human beings, and he's just moving them on his own mental board.
What's the level of sociopathy, or dare I say psychopathy, that is required to win perpetually like that? Because you have no scruples. Because there's no point at which you will say, ooh, this is too far. There's no such thing as too far.
Let's stick with that. Let's stick with that real quick, because we're talking about Paul. We're saying he's larger than life. There's some really interesting things when you look at at how he came up. You know, on paper, his early career looks pretty prestigious. We're talking a major. We're talking a guy who was working on the quote unquote right side of the law for a while. And I love the point about that slow slide into criminality, right? No one wakes up one day and says, yeah, today I'm going to be the villain. right? I'm going full kingpin on this one. It's a slippery slope. It's a slow gradient of, as you said, Jinx, justifying behavior. How would you describe Paul to someone who had never met him? Like if they're about to walk into a room with this guy, what do you tell them before they meet him?
Dan, that's a good question. I'm just thinking, like, what would I do? You know?
Yeah.
It's tough because it's like, I always think it's like when you first meet someone, it's like you get like that like kind of minute like of like, you know, just trying to read them up really quickly. And I feel like Paul is someone that very quickly, he seems dangerous, at least to me, right? But I also think you cannot remove the fact that when people meet Paul, they need something, right? They need someone to get them out of trouble. And he's saying all the right things. And people like that are fucking scary to me. Like the guy was just like, you're like, this is my life. He's like, don't worry. And you're like, I'm here because I'm worried. What are you talking about? Anyone that just like, you got to right size things, you know? So like, if you're not right size, obviously a lawyer shouldn't be terrified. He shouldn't, you know, instill some sort of confidence, but like someone who's making it seem like he's just going to make this go away. Okay. Like,
yeah. Oh, Jinx, you got a headache?
Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah. You know, it's like the guys who are just like nothing phases them, or that everything's balanced out, right? So like if my problem is this tall and you're telling me it's nothing, that balance is going to come somewhere else. What are you going to do to make it nothing? You know,
that's really the way to put it.
Maybe it's my own skepticism, but people like that usually like, if I were in the chair, I'd, you know, it's like, okay, I'm giving him less details about my life and I'm ready.
Yeah. Do you see formative moments in his career? Like clearly, again, he didn't start off as this character. Were there crossroad moments, people might call it, with this slide into criminality?
For sure. I mean, you know, one that you all just said that made me like, oh, I guess that makes a ton of sense. What he's willing to do to win. But as you all said it clicked in my mind. I'm like, oh, well, when he was with the U.S. attorneys, he was winning. And it wasn't even that he lost the case. It wasn't until he felt like he lost his relationship with, you know, the fellow, like sort of U.S. attorneys, or I don't know if you call it the bureau. That's when he was like, okay, you guys, and I'm going to go to this side. And so in this way, he has to rewrite winning in his mind. But I also think like, and if winning is your key North Star, then that's just subjective, you know, like however you do it and who you're winning with, you know, it's like, if I can't beat them, join them energy is, that to me is like, that's less about I'm here to do the right thing. I'm here to uphold the law. So what Noel was saying, it's like, I'm here to win. And there is no right side to that. That's just you. But the other thing I'll say is that, you know, apparently he grew up in a law family, you know, it's like, it's one of those things like as you get older, like I grew up and I look back sometimes, like even in my neighborhood, I'm from New Jersey originally. And even in my neighborhood, some of the guys that are cops are some of the kids that were tripping in high school. I was like, oh, so like, how is everyone that I went to high school with that's a cop, but like, yo, you sold weed, like, what are you doing? You know? So it's funny how those lines blur, how closely related they are for 1,000 reasons. Maybe you want to be a cop because things around you are crazy, or maybe you want to be a cop because it's like, because of what it allows you to do. I don't know. Those,
because you were bullied and now you want to bully literally everyone.
I think about it and I'm like, I think about it, and to me, like when you have cops, ostensibly criminals are their colleagues, right? Like they are in constant conversation with them, almost more than they're in conversation with like any of us on this call. So like if you are a political journalist, your colleagues are politicians, right? Like there is a dance between the two of you. And I think it's hard not to have some of that paint rub off when those two fires touch. And I think for Paul, someone who grew up in a cop family, he grew up, you know, around police and also understanding like the military as well. I think that he has an extreme sense of loyalty, but where that compass points, that's what's up for grabs, you know?
So I want to switch from Paul a little bit to the other side, to the FBI, because you, in Criminal Attorney, you introduced us to somebody named Sean Brokos, who is an FBI agent that you got to listen to the show to understand this, but it has basically been eyeing Paul for a long time, but not even necessarily Paul, eyeing ways to kind of rise in the ranks of the FBI. You describe how she got in just on a whim. She like decided, you know what, I'm going to go try and join the FBI, and then figured out how to move up. quickly, can you describe like the process of moving up through the FBI, at least her attempt to do it by flipping somebody low level and moving up? And then how did she encounter Paul?
Well, it feels like, one, I just thought it was crazy that she went from being like the bank teller just right to the FBI. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
for some reason imagine that being like a lifelong journey, but apparently you can do it in like 7 years, which is crazy. I don't know. Is that okay? But you know,
right. That's like someone getting their medical degree a little too soon. You know what I mean?
Just walk into a hospital. You know what? I'm going to join up.
Yeah.
Which is funny because Paul tries to pull that off later. But you know, to me, it's like you need less. You need like you can fly a plane way less. You know, I don't know, but. Yeah, it's like, you know, with any sort of law enforcement, it seems to me it's the cases that you make, right? Like your ability to turn over cases and then also like quickly and how much those cases net. I imagine like whatever the sort of jurisdiction you're in, what their agenda is. Maybe it's violent crime, maybe it's drugs. You know, the FBI in her era is probably, this is like, what, 2000? This is like, probably post 9/11. It's a lot of drugs. A huge oversight from like Homeland Security is involved. So, and also she's in the metro area. So I imagine there's a lot of competition, a lot of dollars circulating. But her, she's playing in the background of Newark, New Jersey, which is sort of in, you know, the background of a New York City. So, which, you know, at the time, I mean, especially with Newark, it's like, well, drugs are everywhere, but in Newark, it has sort of a connotation, the baggage of that. So for Sean, these are going to be the cases that she makes. And if she can take down this drug kingpin, I believe I have the name Will Baskerville. If she can take him down, you know, that's big. And that allows her to rise through the ranks or, you know, who knows, maybe be a director. But it would be huge news to take down a drug crew in Newark, New Jersey.
Yeah. And she goes after a guy named Chemo, right? Who is kind of lower level, I guess.
Yeah.
And man, the story of his life is tragic. And, you know, you go over that a lot in the show. Sorry, I'm just talking like a fan right now. I wanted to learn more about Chemo because Chemo's with his stepfather I'm jumping forward and I'm spoiling stuff. So let's just say Chemo's an integral part of this show, but he only gets to play a part for a short time.
Yeah, you know, and I think what's interesting about this is that the role Chemo plays, right? He's not a decision maker. You know, he's sort of like kind of pushed and pulled between all these people with more power, you know, whether it's Will Baskerville, you know, Sean Brokos, in many ways, you know, Paul Bergrin and what he's got going on over there. And then, you know, you have to also acknowledge that Chemo's made whatever decision within the circumstances he has up until this point when Sean Frost has passed. So I think what you end up feeling with Chemo, probably more than anyone, is, like I said, that gradient, like the shades of gray of someone's life and like how you can be in this really uncomfortable position almost from the start. And so like, yes, you have choices, but what are your choices? Is it between a rock and a hard place, you know? And when someone that doesn't have that sort of that environment or that set of circumstances, when they come into your world, there's no acknowledgement of what you've gone through, what you don't have. It's just it's just opportunity to them, right? It's opportunity for Sean. It's opportunity for Paul. It's opportunity for Will, you know? So it's a sad part of the story for sure.
And with FBI agent Brokos, there's something that stands out. And in a weird way, Ben, it kind of parallels how you were telling us the provenance of the story, how you all discovered the story of Criminal Attorney, because Agent Brokos is starting to look at this criminal defense attorney that she at first does not know, right?
Yeah.
From a can of paint. And she's going, hang on, every time this guy takes a case, he wins. Going back to the idea of winning. And just for anybody not in the legal field, you're not supposed to win all the time, usually. I mean, they want to, but that's not how it works. And so there's this excellent storytelling in our narrative where we start to ask ourselves, how can somebody, a criminal defense attorney, always seem to be winning? Do you see that parallel? Because I feel like she started looking at Paul Bergrin similar to the way like you guys discovered him, not necessarily looking at him from the jump.
Well, also too, it's like you got to figure she's also trained in a way to like spot not the weakness, but spot like irregularities, and like she's constantly dealing with people who either A, aren't winning, or B, she's going to hand them their loss, right? So like if you're looking, my dad said something to me once as a kid. He was talking about like he was describing school and like kids that act tough, and he's like, man, the kid who's like trying to fight everybody, like, the kid who just goes around, he's like, his day is going to come because he's winning too much, and there's a guy who wins over there is going to look for him, right? And it's just what it is. It's like levels of competition. It's like for Sean, she spots that. She can smell that, right? It's like, hey, taking down a chemo is nothing. I mean, to the point where chemo doesn't even register on her bill. Like, he becomes a pawn. That's not something that you take home. That's not a trophy. You know, he needs to be used to get a real winner, you know? And so it says what competition looks like and what people that play at a high level, what they spot. And if you play in certain fields, people will like smell that out. It's like, if LeBron drops 60 tomorrow, he's getting that random drug test. Like, they're like, hey, like, you know, like tomorrow, just pee in a cup, man. Like, you know, if you go up to bat, like we got the World Series coming, like if every at bat you're connecting, you're getting the letter the next day, you know, like we're checking. Yeah. And this is a game where we want someone to win, but you can't win that much. And I think that says a lot about us. That says a lot about Sean. It's just like, yeah, how we regard with, you know.
Well, see, Paul seemed to have some kind of formula figured out before he even got to the U.S. Attorney's Office. So when he was back in Essex County and he's a prosecutor, at least from what I can tell, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Jinx, Paul had a tendency to do favors for people that could do him favors. So the reason why he gets in trouble and ends up leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office is because he becomes a character witness in the trial for 2 homicide detectives that appear to have really helped him win cases, right?
Which is like, first off, dude, like that's the other thing. It's like, yo, you could resist this. You could say no, but he can't, you know? But yeah, that's exactly what he was doing. He's playing both sides of the law. And I think for him, we're just talking about like, let's say if, not to start like LeBron drug test rumors. I don't know why I said that. But you know,
don't do that.
Right?
I don't know. That made me laugh out loud. I think we keep it.
You know, but it's like winning within the confines of the game, right? Like, are you actually winning in the courtroom, or in the LeBron case, are you winning on the court, or did you do something before the game to win? You know, that isn't preparation. And I think Paul understood that. I think Paul was like, hey, I need to do something outside of this in order to win. So whether it's trade favors, whether it's to leverage people, whether it's intimidation, like I think he understood how to grease those wheels and move those things. Yes, he's very theatrical in court and he's very boastful and has a lot of confidence, but that's fueled by the fact that he knows he's got, he's counting cards over here, So I think, I think what he did outside of court shows what he was willing to do. And it's now that you say it, like, I feel like I should look into this. It's like, did they vacate those cases? Like how many of those cases did they have to go back and look at?
Ooh. And we'll pause here for a word from our sponsors. And we're back.
Talking about folks like this, it always kind of brings me back to an inherent distrust I have of people that maybe make the idea of being a defense attorney their whole life's goal. It just, I know it's required for the judicial system to function. You have to have people on both sides and people willing to represent people that seem guilty as sin or whatever. But it just seems like a snake pit. Like, I just wonder what your thoughts are on the profession, of being that kind of attorney. And like, if you have a balance from your research as to like, what do the good ones look like versus folks like this?
Well, one, my perspective is completely skewed because for whatever reason, I watched like Law and Order the entire time making this for no, like, as if that was not even for it to help. I just,
it's like a comfort show is what it is.
It really is.
I love cooking to murder, man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sprinkle a little homicide on top,
But by the way, just a plug here. Everybody go listen to Law and Order Criminal Justice System. The first season's out right now.
On the iHeart Podcast Network.
Or wherever you find your favorite
shows.
Wherever
you find your podcast.
Skewed. Okay, I guess I could see why, but maybe please like elaborate.
Well, it's just like because it's always like that thing behind. I mean, obviously it's a totally fabricated show, but it's the conversations behind that we're not privy to, where the person knows the person they're representing is guilty. So again, it's what you're saying. It's about winning. And the fact that we have a system like that is pretty wild, where the prosecution's like, hey, we got to prove this person's guilty. They just did something terrible. And the criminal defense attorney's like, hey, I know you did something terrible. We have to find a way to get you out of it. And I think something about that, I can't call it American, but I guess I can call it American. I don't know how these things work in any other country. That's kind of America. Like that's, there was a question that arose when we were talking about anti-heroes at some point and why we root for like the bad guys sometimes. And I'm like, that's American. Like, that's like cowboy culture. That's, Billy the Kid. That's like American gangster. We root for that person.
That's also the revolving door of private and public industry. It's a stem to stern. Yeah. Like who better to watch the hen house than the former wolf? You know what I mean? He knows the score.
The New York Times article, I remember I found the headline, it circulates every once in a while, where it's like the CIA finds itself not guilty of like planting crack. You're like, oh, what? Like, you're investigating yourself.
Sure. Why not? We've talked about on this show so many times, Jinx, just about how that American thing you're talking about, where, well, Ben, we always talk about how the United States was formed via conspiracy to rise up against the powers that be, right? I mean, that's literally how the country formed. And it just, everything then that we create inside it is this way of rejecting and stuff. I don't know.
And what we define underneath that, right? So like, we'll say that something's like fair. And if that's your starting point, it's not until like, it takes a long time to question what fair is. Like that is not something you think about when you're like 10, 18. If you think about 18, you end up on the FBI watch list. But like, if you start, by the time you think about that, you're usually an adult of like, wait, what's fair? Who came up with it? And we have these systems that, like a criminal defense attorney, like what makes you good? And are you good because you're like what is that? Or it's just really, I think it goes back to what you're saying. You're good because you win,
And this gets us to another parallel I would suggest. I'm walking down the street for this one, is there's something Colonel Kurtz about it, like in Heart of Darkness or Apocalypse Now, because we see Paul Bergrin, he's a prosecutor. Like I was asking earlier, Jinx, for a formative moment, it sounds like the moment where he's a character witness is where things start to turn on him with his legal colleagues, the prosecutors. And I love that point you made earlier about, technically your colleagues in the pursuit of law are also going to be criminals. So this then, would this be his formative moment? Because I believe he resigns from the attorney's office. Like, just like Colonel Kurtz, his career looks great on paper. I think he was working for Alito at some point, for Samuel Alito.
Which is crazy.
Right. And is it simply that motivation to win that made him switch sides and play defense?
I mean, I feel like I'm just engaging with these thoughts for the first time because I kind of took it as it was. As you guys started bringing up the concept of winning, this feels really like the theme. And I know it's like in the trailer. He'll do anything to win, but you guys are saying it, I'm like, oh, shit, like, yeah, he will. And I think what he saw is other people that play similar position on the court that weren't expressing him the same, like they got in the way of his win. And, he resigned, but they were pretty much pushing him out. And I think it's one of those things where sometimes you're doing the same thing as someone else, but you reveal that you are doing it for two different ways and for different reasons. And I could see him easily going back and being like, what loyalty? Or when someone is like, well, but we won, and someone's like, no, that's not how you do it, or look at all my other wins. Why don't they negate this thing? And it's like, hey, we're lawyers, like we're a U.S. attorney's office, like you're tripping, like you can't go do that. And these guys, these are the ones that you're going to do this for, and I think he ran into the other part of like the American culture, especially when you get into anything that deals with like the judicial system or politicians, is like, hey, we also have an image to upkeep and you're not really one of us. And this was like the moment that we decide you're not one of us. This is where we kick you out the country club. And I think that is something that we don't really lean heavily on in Paul's story. But Paul is like, he's from humble beginnings, he's probably from that world where police and criminals occupy the same bar, like they all drink together, but they go out and go do their own thing, especially, somewhere like New Jersey. So I think that, I think he probably had a rude awakening there. Anyone else would be like, hey, it's a lesson to learn or it's not where I need to be. he's like, fuck you guys. I'm gonna get revenge, you know?
Which you kind of like, as I hate to say it, we're so programmed, but like as Americans, a lot of us listening along tonight, there were several people in the audience who went, I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
I might not agree, but I've been there.
I didn't know how bad a person I was until I rewatched Breaking Bad. Like it wasn't until we got, like, I saw where Walter started. I was like, oh man, he really transformed. And then I was like, wait, I didn't stop. I don't think I ever stopped rooting for him. Like, I'm up, you know, like I'm not okay. You know?
Yeah. Well, I love that Paul did an East Coast Saul Goodman. That makes me really happy because that is kind of what he did. And I want to stay on this track of him doing favors for eventual favors and creating basically a crew of human beings that he knows and he can call upon and he can help out. Mm-hmm. I want to jump to Jason Itzler, I think is how you say his name.
Yeah.
This is a guy that somehow Paul meets and gets to know because Jason Itzler is dealing with some legal issues. Paul meets him and figures out, oh, I think we could have a cozy little relationship here and get into a business venture or two. Talk to us about what Jason Itzler was doing and how these guys formed a partnership.
Well, Jason's running essentially like this brothel, you know, New York Confidential. And it's funny because I don't know why I'm like realizing all these things as you guys are talking. I'm like, oh, wait, that's the show we made. But like, you know,
it's easy to lose perspective when you're in it like that.
Yeah. It's like Jason is, you know, he runs a brothel, which naturally it's going to have you run right up against the law for better or worse. Cause I can't even imagine this clientele, how many people were in there that were all supposed to be on this other side of the law. Right.
And also the name is a little on the nose. Like, you know what I mean? Like call it something different on that.
Yeah, it's not like, you know, it's like having, you know, like you got like a drug den and like on the outside it just says secrets. Like what the like you can't, you know.
Oh, you go to Secrets? Sorry, folks, we're all from Atlanta.
Yeah.
Secrets are no fun.
It's like
there was a story recently about like a giant bag of drugs that was found that was labeled definitely not a giant bag of drugs.
Yes.
We're along those lines at this point.
Which like if I were in law enforcement and I found it, again, I'd be like, you got that. That's cool.
Yeah.
So this is a pretty crazy story, though. Like this is, you know, obviously we've got a little bit of levity here, but a brothel being run out of this location in New York.
An escort service, guys.
In Manhattan. Sure. Something confidential. I can't say it. I'm not the judge. But what we see here immediately, kind of like how you're talking about our FBI agent Brokos, how you get that spidey sense. You can smell an ill wind. This is a huge red flag to all sorts of other related crimes, right? And this is why these guys, Jason and Paul, kind of begin, you know, messing with each other because like you were saying earlier, Jinx, people don't come to him unless they need something.
A few things here. Smelling ill wind. I'm stealing that. That's amazing. Just imagine like describing someone else like, oh, he's got an ill wind. Like that's, oh my God. But I'd also say, yeah, you know, and also I want to go back to that first question, what I would say to someone if they met Paul. Yeah. Because as you're saying this, like, if you're Jason, you're like, oh, Paul's like me. No, he's not. Paul is always going to have the upper hand, right? Because Paul plays Jason doesn't get afforded the benefit of the doubt. He runs New York Confidential, right? Will Basker doesn't get afforded the benefit of the doubt. None of his other clients get afforded the benefit of the doubt. That's why they get a lawyer, because the lawyer's supposed to have the benefit of the doubt. But because Paul is playing, you know, quick and fast with their careers, or not their lives, he's able to kind of like permeate these lines and kind of transfer back and forth. And what would you do if you told your lawyer, you tell your lawyer your secrets, he's supposed to protect you, instead he sees an opportunity. So it's almost even different than Sean, because he doesn't have to look for it. He's created a shop where you come here to be repaired. And he's like, hey, I'm going to repair you to the public side, but we're going to use the thing that's broken about you. And I'm going to manipulate that for my own gain. So you're never going to get away from this thing. You know, it's like the mob. It's you know, like, hey, Tony Soprano, can you help me get out of this jam? He's like, I'm going to pay this thing, but you're not going to get out of the jam. I'm the jam. You know what I mean? Like, you work for me now.
he has a very different interpretation of attorney-client privilege, because now it's his privilege to treat people as a tool for a use, right?
1000%. And he's Sean has a whole other level of privilege because she's the law, but Paul is much more nefarious because he's playing both sides in a way that Sean isn't, you know?
Well, and he's now got a brothel, which he can use as that tool to coerce somebody into doing something by getting them into a position, right? Where, oh, well, if anyone finds out that you're over here, insert NBA player, or, like high level human beings that are rolling through New York Confidential when it moves, it moves to a different location, like in Manhattan. Oh,
that,
and this was
he steals, by the way. He steals it from Jason and reopens it himself. And, and then like changes the name slightly. I think it was like New York Confidential, like Incorporated. We're like, oh shit,
classy, cool.
It's like when you copy someone's paper and you like write the name on the top too, and the teacher's like, hey, that's try harder. But yeah, he's able to sort of manipulate all these characters. And what's not lost on me is that there's a part in the story where we talk about, the cops are coming and they're watching the cops raid them on a web camera. And I'm like, guys, he's got a webcam. Like, he's got stored footage of everyone that's walking in this place. And you're coming here for secrecy. You're coming here, to be able to like do the things you want to do away from it confidentially. There's nothing confidential about security cameras that record what you do. And Paul has access to this, Paul and his crew. So he's never what he says he is. So to go back to that initial question of what I would say to people that deal with Paul is like, it's sort of like, that meme of Jesse and Walter where he's like, you can't keep getting away with this. Paul, up until this point, will always get away with it. He will always have the upper hand. You cannot let your guard down around him,
He's big into insurance, for sure, right?
1000%.
Yeah. Before we jump away from New York Confidential, do you mind, Ben? I wanted to tell you guys the thing I was mentioning off mic like earlier before. When you look at the address of where New York Confidential moved, when it was in Hoboken and then it moved to Manhattan. And when it moved to Manhattan, the address was 79 Worth Street in Manhattan. And if you look at that location on Google Maps, just if you've listened to this show before, and then you go to Street View and you just turn the Street View 180 degrees, you will see the AT&T Long Lines building, also known as the giant windowless building that's down there in Manhattan. That's the place where Operation Stellar Wind was taking place when the United States and the NSA decided they needed to do the whole warrantless wiretapping thing during the Bush administration in the early 2000s. It was happening in that building in that year, 2003, 2004.
Yeah, that's the same time.
Exactly at the same time that New York Confidential was occurring.
I think it's also really diplomatic that you're putting stellar wind in past tense.
Oh no! Well, when it was being enacted for the first time during the Bush administration, it's crazy to me.
Can you imagine? It's funny because even when I found out where Paul is locked up, right? I don't know, spoiler alert, I guess. Well, no, he's in prison. He's in Supermax. And I was like, Supermax? I mean, like, does that go for any murderer? And then I realized, like, one, you really can't let this guy near a phone, right? He's like, he's compulsive. Like, if he gets a phone, what will he do? Which is like crazy to think we can't let you get a phone, because you'll try again and you really can't help yourself. But when you say that, I mean, that's really crazy. Like if I had a guy who, it's like murdering a drug dealer does not put you in Supermax, like almost on any standards. But like tampering with witnesses, when you add them all up, I could see it. But I think his connection to the U.S. Attorney's Office, just in that timeline of his, like, no, you're not getting back out. That's not happening. And if you bring up the Stellar Wind thing, it's like, there's a club across the street from work. Like, right?
Yeah.
Like,
isn't that weird?
Yeah.
It explains
because like you said, you have to do the most to get in Supermax. And I love the comparison you've made earlier, Jinx, the idea of Walter White, right? A person who is not ostensibly necessarily physically dangerous, right? But who is mentally a supervillain. You can't let these people around phones because especially because they already know the inner workings of prosecution, which is a tremendous power.
And Paul hasn't like murdered anyone himself that we know of, but like his crime, same as Walter's, is like social engineering. Like he's incredibly good at moving the pieces on the board. And where someone else would see a risk, he just sees a tight window to operate. If he were, it's like how like athletes see the field differently. Like they just see the style of play differently. They don't know what they're going to, like looking at Kyrie Irving dribble, like he doesn't know what he's going to do 15 feet away, but he sees an opening. And then somehow his learnings, his mechanics, everything he's built around himself allows him to shoot a gap or move this way. It's all unfolding in real time. I think Paul is a savant. I think he is that kind of person where like he puts something in motion. He can't totally predict it, but how present he is in these moments requires like either an addiction or fascination with this, because everyone's got sleep and this guy wakes up in crime, like at least up here,
That's a way. And seeing the field differently is a beautiful comparison there. It's somewhat terrifying comparison, but I believe it's absolutely astute because the risk calculations are different.
Hey, let's take a quick pause in our conversation with Jinx to hear a word from our sponsors, and then we shall return momentarily. And as promised, we have returned.
This is where we get to the next act, maybe, of the slide, because when we're saying he's a savant, which after listening to Criminal Attorney, I fully agree with, we're saying he's a savant, folks. Please do not misconstrue that as us saying he got away, because as talented and as lucid and brilliant as this guy was, it seems that things began to go wrong, partially due to New York Confidential. New York Confidential Inc.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. his second attempt. But I think that's the other thing about winning is like, while he can be talented and that helps him manifest wins, it's also the same thing that it's like, it's being an addict. He's addicted to it, clearly, because there's moments where he could stop. Like, Jason Itzler gets locked, right, for New York Confidential. Paul says, okay, let's just run it back. Like, what? Like, this guy, the guy you're supposed to be defending, he's in trouble for it. And you said, you know what, this is really good. I'm going to take this. And then he starts kind of losing his powers and his abilities. There's a reporter who catches on and Mike wants to interview him. And he tells a whole lie about he's given up law and now he's pursuing being a doctor. Like, what? Like that's so far out there. That's just such a verifiable lie. That's so dumb. It's you're sitting in class and your teacher's like, oh, who has, she's going around collecting homework, and you haven't gotten that far. So you're like, oh, it's in my book bag. It's like, go get it. You're like, you're like,
I didn't think of the next step.
Man. Yeah. You're just trying to survive the combo,
Right. Speaking of next steps, you've got all of this money that you're generating and people are coming to you and they're asking you to do stuff with money. What do you do if you're Paul and you've got some ideas? Well, let's say you're married and you've got a girlfriend too, and you and your girlfriend have a condo, and you also own a restaurant called Isabella's. And it's, somewhere there in Jersey. Now, look, I haven't spent much time in Jersey except for Elizabeth. I've spent some time over there just through an ex. And one thing I know, there are so many amazing restaurants in that part. Like
that
just,
one,
there's this one area like right in New Jersey there where it's like the best restaurants you've ever been to, at least in my opinion.
Sometimes they're surprised if you walk in.
Yeah, that's the thing. Some of them are doing other stuff, not just making great food.
They're like, hey, you here for food?
Oh,
yeah, we got a couple spots like that in Atlanta. But folks, if you have traveled to the right places or the wrong places, you know what we're talking about. Jinx, what Matt's referencing to something that came up a little while ago on our show, because oddly enough, you know, the common trope for this is if you catch yourself in one of those restaurants on a good day, service is going to be kind of slow and confused. But it's often really good food too, which is the devil's bargain of the whole thing. You know what I mean?
You're like, hey, if they rate, you know, we used to have that when just living in Atlanta, you know, where you're like, you go in the corner store, you're like, corner store or drug front, like which one? You know, like nothing's on the shelves, like nothing.
There's dust on the candy bars. Yeah.
Yeah, you're just like, all right, guys, like you got to do what you got to at least get in the act of it. Like, you know, you have like some zebra cakes over here, Skittles, something like, you know, like something. But yeah, man. Wait, now I'm talking about food.
Isabella's,
Yolanda.
Paul Bergrin. How do you wash your money?
I mean, one, it's like, we'll definitely get rid of New York Confidential Inc. Like that just feels so obvious. But I think it's that other thing too that makes Paul a true criminal is like, I don't know if he ever expressed wanting to get out the game, but you do need an exit plan. Granted, he's under a RICO charge, so like anything he touches is like not, it's a wrap. But you know, to at least start
RICO law.
Yeah, like everything you touch, it's just a big fishing net over everything you've got going, and whoever else you've given money to, especially if they're within your employ. But a restaurant, sure, but then you can't go there and like then continue to do drug deals and make hits. Like you can't, like a laundromat, it needs to be a laundromat. You know, you can't then be like, hey, it's a laundromat, also like it's a drug front. Like you're missing the point of laundering your money. You're just buying more property. Like
Sean said when they eventually went in there were like kilos of cocaine just in the back of the restaurant.
It's like, hey man, like this is to distract them, not to. Like, now you've got an address, you got an LLC. What the f is wrong with you? Like, why are you doing this? You know,
it was called Isabella's International Restaurant Incorporated.
But also, what a great name! Like, you know, it's like Bada Bing, Isabella's. Like, it just needs like I haven't seen it, but it just needs to. I can just see it written in script. Like, you know, so beautiful.
That little Italy script, yeah. And because he is doing this thing that continually pushing the envelope, right? We could say he's also playing some heavy mental parkour, a lot of rationalization for how he will make this feel reasonable, right? We don't really have an exit plan. We're just swimming further into the open ocean of crime. It is inevitable that this guy will get caught. It is an unsustainable, untenable plan. So we talked about, you know, coming in to check out Isabella's, encountering kilos of cocaine. Would you say this is when stuff starts to go wrong for him? Is this where the teacher asked for his backpack?
Yeah, and I think this is where he's, it's that moment where you're digging through your backpack. And forget even doing your homework anymore. You're just like, I need a better line. Like, I need something better than this, you know? But yeah, man, he's, you know, things start to unravel. And this is where, like, they're catching him, not just like, I mean, he's on tape. I think this is where his role, again, of winning. I was talking to a musical artist recently. They were talking about longevity and how they have to, like, switch their careers up and how, like, they start out doing one thing and how they look for, you know, other things in their career to sustain themselves. And I was asking them, like, hey, does winning hurt that process, right? Like, if you were selling out, you know, arenas, or if you had a certain type of song you were making and people loved it, is it hard to move on? You know, is it like, you know, Green Bay when they've got like Brett Favre, he's still selling jerseys, but they're not winning games. And you got this quarterback on the bench, it's Aaron Rodgers, like, do you let him in? You know, Tom Brady, you know, it's like, he had a great game, but I'm sure there was heavy conversation between like, do we let Bledsoe back in? This guy won one game. How do you make the justification against the thing that was serving you versus where you need to go? So I give those like metaphors and parallels to Paul, because Paul has won, right? Especially in his world and in his mind, he's won. And he's won by, you know, representing people within court. He's won by sort of these favors and manipulating all these different institutions and crews. I think that's what sort of emboldens him and makes him think that he's going to be fine no matter what. I mean, this dude like represented himself in court. Like,
oh boy,
that's
what's that old Mark Twain quote, right? A fool for an attorney. Yeah. Oh man, I still think, that's, I don't want to sound too crass about it, but that is so damn ballsy, like that is something other criminals in this echelon themselves will not do.
But he has been rewarded for that in his world, right? So it's like this reward system. He's been winning playing this quarterback. And now the game's asking for him to do something different. And he's like, nah, I'm not going to bench this play. I'm not going to bench this approach. This is going to work for me. Yep. I went triple platinum doing this. I'm not going to try a different style. Like he's, and everyone's saying, don't do this. He has help, like people feel like indebted to him. And you can't imagine the people that are within his yoke, right? That feel like I'm going to help Paul, right? People that like, it could be career suicide and they don't even have to really worry about it because Paul's worst enemy is himself. And you know what you were saying at the beginning. It's like his desire to win and also like not just win, because now I'm like evolving the thought. It's not even just him, the win. He needs to win. It needs to be Paul. It can't be someone else that wins. And he goes, because I don't know if he would have gotten away. I don't see a way he would have. But I don't know. He ended up in Supermax for AC-10.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to set the record for assist, basically.
No. I don't want to spoil too much, but just I want to bring this up too, because we're talking about the trials that he ends up being in, Paul ends up being in, where he's the guy that everybody's looking at. He's the defendant. And he does have help. Like I think you talk about John, who's a fellow attorney who helps him, and then Larry, who's a criminal defense attorney who helps him as well. But before all that stuff, there's the main trial, the first trial that our FBI agent finally, and everybody that she's working with is finally going to prosecute Paul for this. I think it's a murder charge or an attempted or a conspiracy to murder. I don't know exactly what the charge was. But the crazy thing I just want to talk to you about is how on earth did the judge decide, the people on the law side decide to just go to trial about the homicide rather than all of the criminal activity together? Because I think they said, they told the FBI agent, you can't talk about anything except for this murder.
They limited the scope.
Yeah.
So, and again, that's like this, that's really makes you start to poke holes in this legal system, which in so many ways creates a Paul, right? Like he gets his power from this institution. If he were, laying bricks somewhere, or I don't know, like a football coach, like would he be able to manifest his power? Maybe this thing is in most people, but we can't access it, right? That's another thing about like crime is opportunity, right? Like the ability to go do it and people that like fuel you doing that. So like when we talk about these like huge, criminal, Fortune 500 CEOs and, the 1% that are like moving things around, you need opportunity to do that. You need systems at play that you can't fight too hard to do it. Obviously there's legal loopholes, etc. But like you ultimately need the runway to take off. And that to me is a perfect example of how like how confusing and flawed this system is with like archaic ideas of like what makes sense, to the point where like they're all actually working against each other, but also working in concert with each other in a really weird way.
And pushing each other too, like enabling. I think that's a brilliant point. The system the system demands a Paul.
And when you get to it, it's like, okay, if the system demands this, what does that ask of Sean, right? What does it ask of the FBI? There was like heavy conversations. We were making this of like, is Sean a good character, right? Like, is she a good person? It's like, someone's like, that's her job. Okay, but like, why does that job exist? Or I remember one time I was waiting on the subway. I was with my boy, and they're like the undercover cops in New York City are always really funny because they're always wearing this very cliched outfit. It's always like sports jersey, Nikes, like baseball cap turned backwards, and I'm like, all right.
But is that real, Jinx? Like you can kind of point them out.
Literally,
you can tell. They're the guy from the 90s.
Yeah, exactly.
But what if that's just how I dress, Jinx? And I just like walking around New York like that.
Here's the
Then
thing.
eventually you'll become a cop.
And you'll be untouchable. Like actually the secret way to get by undercover cops is to dress like an undercover cop. Like you have to kind of meet them where they're at. But, it's like my boy was like, yo, I feel like undercover cops, I feel like that's cheating. And I was like, like I never even engaged with that idea before. He's like, I feel like that's not fair. Like they should be cops and the people should be criminals. And I was like, all right, but what this system asks you to do, and for Sean, it's like she gets a chemo. It's like either having a gun on you or being connected to drug sales is illegal or it isn't. But in this case, chemo now becomes a tool in the system. Sure, that's her job. But like, why is there a job where chemo doesn't just serve time? You present him these options where like, okay, you would have done like what, 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, whatever it was. If that's the crime and that's the time, okay, that's a whole other argument. But now he's a player in your system, and there's no world that this ends up well for him.
Isn't it the same on either side? Like whether or not you end up in Paul's sphere of influence or the FBI's sphere of influence, you are continually getting played by a system, and now you are just an integral part of that system. No, excuse me. You are a tiny part of that system and not integral at all to its functioning, because anybody else could be you in that scenario.
Cars still need gas, regardless of which direction they're driving.
It is. They're fuel for the system. And when you really think about it, neither system what it portrays to do is doing what it does. Like, so you're supposed to end these like drug dealers that are like taking over the city, but chemo is a worthy cost. Is he not a citizen of the city? Or Paul is supposed to be representing, his client, but in the world of that, the client who stabbed his wife, I forget the guy's name, but he stabs his wife. So she's already been a victim. The daughter gets caught up because he manipulates the daughter at a young age to testify against the mom. It's like, there's no one's doing what they say they're doing. Right. I'm like watching the news, and it's all these like FDA rollbacks, and like they're like all these sort of issues with food. And I was just like, man, like this, like let's say XYZ restaurant's supposed to be selling us burgers, but they're killing people or they're unhealthy. It's like you're now, the moment that happens, this is wrong. Or like you sell us tires, and the tires are like stripping on the road. Like the moment this happens, you are not completing the mission at hand. But goes back to the original point from earlier. The mission at hand is winning. Not making the safest tires or the burgers that are edible or arresting people for their crimes or getting people off of outside of the legal, yoke. It's just winning,
Boar's Head Ham. Sorry.
And for the record, that's the Velez family, right?
Yes.
When we're talking about the stabbing. Yes.
Carolyn Velez.
And Jinx, here we obviously want to go further in depth, but we don't want to spoil too much of the show. As you can tell, folks, Matt, Noel, and yours truly, going by Ben for these purposes, we have listened to the show. We are deep into this, and I think one of the most fascinating things that we've encountered in this conversation is a deeper exploration. Like, we're philosophical at this point about how the system is created. The show is available now wherever you find your favorite podcast, as we say. Jinx, we have to ask you, what do you hope people take away from Criminal Attorney?
Man, I think that like true crime in itself is evolving, right? Like I think it's like before it was sort of like a find the bad guy, or when you watch even like if you watch like Dahmer, right? It's like he's one bad guy, right? And everyone's like trying to find this person to catch them and know he's the bad guy, but like you have to find them. I think as sort of true crime is evolving, you're finding that there's much more. I think you guys used the word gradient earlier. There's much more shades of gray, right? There's so many more people that are involved that criminals run in league with each other, even if they're on opposite sides of the table. And, this show, thinking about the show I did prior to this, which is Conviction, and then this one, Criminal Attorney, I realized like how, it's like HBO, I'll do like a spinoff series, like I'm going to do Game of Thrones, I'm going to do House of Dragons. If you have a show, like you find one subject in true crime, there's probably a spinoff of characters that are related to that crime, just because like, okay, we caught the bad guy. All right, next season, what did you do to catch him? So I hope people see that like crime is not a binary. It's a spectrum, you know, and like how we justify where we sit on that spectrum, especially when we're on opposite sides of it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, it's been a tremendous pleasure talking to you, Jinx. We really appreciate all the work you've done.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Great times. Does make me just worried. I don't know why. This show just makes me worried. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I just like, this is what we're all doing. All right, cool.
Let's go to New Jersey.
That's the other thing. It's like, this show should make you book a trip to go to Newark, New Jersey. But no, it does. Like, the shows are entertaining, but if you're like me, I know my recording producer is a man named Chris, and he's excellent to work with. But Chris, I was like, Chris, we're tacking 20 minutes on every session so I can like share my fears with you. You know, just like we're living in a wild world, you know?
Mm-hmm. And we have only touched on very briefly some of your many other projects, Jinx. We've got to say, for anybody who has somehow been under a rock, you do a lot of stuff. We didn't even mention Rap Caviar. We haven't even talked about the, Terminators? The Terminator High?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I was looking at those as well. Where can people go to learn more about your work in addition to Criminal Attorney?
Man, if you are, sounds weird because like I kind of just jumped all these different things. I like was telling someone the other day, I was like, I'm like a cowboy. I like ride in town, you know, like do my thing and then I just ride off to the next town. But yeah, it feels kind of sad to say Instagram. You know, like find me on Instagram. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Brandon Jinx, BrandonGinx. If you are older than 24, you can actually use a website, and it's brandon-jinx.com. But yeah, I try to just bounce around and pick up the phone when people call and get to do exciting stuff like this.
What a ride, folks. Criminal Attorney by Wondery, available now wherever you find your favorite shows. We're not blowing smoke. Jinx does many, many things. And I have to say, I was tremendously impressed with the philosophical caliber of our conversation.
Well, and the generosity of him and his thoughts and his time, given how much stuff he does have going on. So certainly kudos for that. And we really appreciate you joining us, Jinx.
Oh, yeah. Hey, if you want to do your own research after listening to Criminal Attorney, which is from Wondery, by the way, search for Paul, Paul, Bergrin, which is kind of a weird thing to start saying as you like first say it out loud. It's spelled Bergrin.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to see some more recent projects from our friend Jinx, check out Black Twitter, A People's History. There's so much more to this story of Paul Bergrin, and there's so much more to the conversation. We'd love to have Jinx back on in the future. In the meantime, we'd love to have you join the show, folks. We try to be easy through email, through telephone. You can even find us online. Not the flex.
Yes, join us online, where you can find us at The Handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on YouTube with video content galore for your perusing enjoyment, as well as X, FKA Twitter, not to mention Facebook, or we have our Facebook group. Here's where it gets crazy. Join up today on Instagram and TikTok. However, we are Conspiracy Stuff Show.
Hey, want to call us? Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, keep it confidential. No, I'm just joking. When you call in, give yourself a cool nickname and let us know if we can use your name and message on the air. If you've got more to say than can fit in a 3-minute voicemail, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
the entities that read every single piece of correspondence we receive. We love it when you write to us. Give us the links. Give us the pictures. Take us to the edge of the rabbit hole. We'll do the rest. Be well aware yet unafraid. Sometimes the void writes back. We'll say on a side note, I do owe some people a lot of emails. We're on it. Also, apologies to paint-huffing maniacs. That makes sense for one person. But there are many, many more adventures to explore. We need your help. Join us out here in the dark. Conspiracy at iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.